Hi everyone, my name's Annelies Franklin. I'm an occupational therapist.
I'm Ruth Vickerstaffe. I'm also an occupational therapist.
Okay, so we first started to look at sensory integration as a way of working on our inpatient wards back in 2012, and at that time two things sort of came together. One was information that I'd had from a colleague that I trained with in New Zealand, where they were using sensory-based approaches on their inpatient wards and were finding them really effective in reducing restraint and coercive practice across their units. And the other thing at that time was our trust being involved in the implementing recovery through organisational change. And one of the key challenges in that is being aspiring to zero restraint, thinking about changing the nature of our day-to-day interactions and the quality of the experience that we provide on wards, and also changing the way that we approach risk assessment and management to think more about safety planning. And one of the key messages that I wanted to get across was to think about staff who work in acute settings needing to think more about how to manage distress in a creative way. The vision that we had for using sensory integration or sensory-based approaches across our wards was that all inpatient areas would be able to provide a suitable level of sensory stimulation, and that all staff would be aware of the impact of over or under stimulation. And that we would all be able to work to enable service users to recognise and regulate their own sensory arousal levels, and that this would provide a tool to enable staff to de-escalate service users who are becoming distressed, therefore reducing the need for physical intervention techniques and PRN medication. We would aim that sensory resources and appropriate space is available on each ward, and that this provides a tool that service users and carers can take into their own lives to support their recovery. So it's not just about something that we would provide on a ward or do to a person, it's some skills that we would enable them to develop and take away from the ward into their own lives. And it's also a chance, because this is a new and emerging field of working using sensory approaches with adults in mental health settings, that we would be able to share our skills and knowledge with other trusts, and that this would be something that we would have a really great opportunity to become recognised for.
Okay, so a bit about sensory integration then. It was developed by a lady called Jean Ayres. There's a picture of her up there. She was originally a psychologist and retrained as an occupational therapist. And what she was finding, she worked in America, and what she found was a lot of children who were coming through her clinics were people who had been in other treatment settings and that nothing else had worked. So she started to kind of notice some of the trends that were coming through and consequently developed her theory, sensory integration. It's also now trademarked as ASI and is delivered as a formal therapy. It has a prominent history, evidence base within paediatrics, and its evidence comes from neuroscience. In the last 10 years, there's been a real drive to move SI into mental health settings, and in particular adult mental health settings. So I guess following on from what Annelies was saying, it would be really interesting for us to think about how we can implement that within our wards. Okay, so what is it? Can you put your hand up for me if you came in your car today? Okay. Did anyone else in the room come on a bike? Okay. So, just a few. So I've had a cheeky look around during the breaks, and I'm glad to see that everybody is still relatively intact. Nobody had any injuries on their way to here today. So what that would suggest to me is that people's sensory processing in this room is integrated and working quite well. The reason for that being is when you were driving your car, apart from probably having to find out where you were going to park and looking at your sat-nav, you probably didn't have to look at your pedals to know when to press the brake, because you were able to focus on the road and your feet were doing the work for you. In the same way, when you're on your bicycle, you were able to keep your vision straight ahead, you were able to see all the cars coming, trying not to knock you down, at the same time maintaining your balance on the bike, and at the same time being able to pedal using all your kind of motor skills. So that would suggest we all have very good sensory processing. However, what happens if we don't? But Jean would describe our sensory integration as organisation of sensations for use, which is exactly what you demonstrated on the way to here this morning, that you were able to make an adaptive response. She describes our senses giving us information about our environment because the sensations flow into our brain like streams flowing into a lake. Also, what's important is being able to kind of make our adaptive response. So for the medics in the room, forgive my layman's terms, but at the base of your brain, you have what Jean describes as a sensory policeman. And what that little sensory policeman does is it organises and directs the flow of the traffic coming into your brain. So right now, you're probably thinking, there might be someone playing on their phone next to you, or there might be kind of some noise going on somewhere else, and you're trying really hard, I can tell, to focus on exactly what I'm saying. And you're filtering out all those different things. So your sensory policeman would be working. But what happens if you're in a ward and your sensory policeman doesn't work, and there's some banging and some crashing going on, and then someone shouts it's medication time, or actually it doesn't work at all, and you're sat and people are calling your name going, it's medication time, and you're just not registering that feedback. So those things can be quite distressing for people, and it could all be linked to our sensory processing. Okay, so in context for us then, sensory integration is a huge theory, and what we're looking at for CPFT is thinking about the approaches that we can use. But in a long-term vision, we could be in a position to offer full sensory integration assessments, intervention, looking at sensory diets. Just like we might be on a diet program like Weight Watchers, sensory integration can do the same kind of thing, helping people to identify their preferences and to eliminate their environment to be able to help them to function. I put this slide up because these are quite a lot of things that I would imagine that we do in our lives to help us regulate. So perhaps if you've been in a long meeting all day, you might go home and have a glass or two of wine. Some people might leave work and go to the gym. Some people go to the gym in the morning. And what that does is it helps us regulate our arousal levels. So it's a little bit like that radio dial that we have. If we're feeling a little bit sleepy or a little bit tired, we turn it up. If we're perhaps a little bit too overexcited, we do something to turn it down. So it might be a hot water bottle, it might be cocoa, it could be any of those things. But we all have that option to make those choices and do them. And I bet we do that in our day-to-day life and we don't even think about it. But how do we help our service users when they're in inpatient settings and they don't necessarily have the same resources that we have? So some of the strategies that we'd be thinking about using would be calming, organising and alerting strategies, just in the picture that we showed before. When I first started doing my sensory training about 6 years ago, I didn't realise we had 8 senses. So that was a bit of a surprise to me. But thankfully, now that I do know we have them, I find that I often use a lot of vestibular techniques at work. So if I'm feeling a little bit sleepy after I've kind of struggled to do my MAPS roster or whatever else, I have to go for a walk down the corridor. And if I have to go and make a cup of tea, I'll go and choose the furthest away kitchen, so I'm getting that input so that I'm regulated enough for when I come back to do some more work. So I respectfully ask my CPFT colleagues that when they go back to their wards or their working environments, that they put on some sensory goggles. And when they see behaviours on the ward, or if they see things that are happening, that they maybe just take a step back and think for a moment, is what's going on, could that be linked to sensory? Could that be about some sensory processing? And if so, then let's think about some of the strategies that we could use. Thank you.
Thank you.